Today, first of all, before we can even talk about racism, we have to examine the semantics. We have to go over what different words mean. And as you can see here, we have the words stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. So what is the difference between these three terms? So first, I want you to type stereotype, okay, stereotype, okay, just listen and type, okay, treat it as a listening test. Stereotype 就是刻板印象。And what exactly is a stereotype? Stereotype is an overgeneralized idea about a group of people. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with race. You can think perhaps vegetarians. Many people have a stereotype against vegetarians. They may think vegetarians are on the moral high ground and they look down on people who are not vegetarian. That is a typical stereotype. But a stereotype can also be positive. Okay, can you write that down for me? Can also be positive. Can be positive. What is a positive stereotype? Can you write down a positive stereotype that Asians might face? Well, a popular positive stereotype about Asians is that we're good at math. I'm not sure if you have encountered this before, but everyone in the US seems to think that I'm good at math, but I'm actually really poor at math. I actually excel in history, literature, and things related to language. But I always get, I still get a high grade because I have to study very hard, but actually I'm not good at math. Okay, and the next term I want to go over is prejudice. So I want you to distinguish the differences between these two terms, stereotype and prejudice. Prejudice 是偏见的，这边就已经开始变负面的。所以这边的话可以是正面的，也可以是负面，它只是刻板印象而已。So a stereotype isn't necessarily negative, so please write down for me. It can be positive or negative, but a prejudice is generally negative. So it's undeserved, usually negative attitude towards a group of people. Ethnocentrism is an example of a prejudice. 所以是偏见，而且通常是不好的偏见。那 ethnocentrism 这个字到底是什么呢？那应该是民族主义。想想看哦，应该是。民族主义的这个民族优越感啊 ，ethno 就是民族嘛 ，centrism 是自我为中心。So if you are an ethnocentric individual, you perhaps think your ethnicity is superior. Can you spell ethnicity for me? And what is the definition of ethnicity? But I think the term that you are more familiar with is racism. So I want you to take a moment to think, what is the difference between racism and ethnocentrism? Ethnocentrism has more to do with culture. Please write that down. It has more to do with culture. And racism has more to do with the color of your skin, your bone structure, your genetic makeup. So racism is more biological, but this relates to sociology. Ethnocentrism relates to sociology. And racism stems from biological traits. Biological traits. You can try writing that word down. Okay, so one more term, and then I will go over the comments really quickly. And the last one we have is discrimination. 所以我们从 stereotype 到偏见，偏见就已经变成负面了。那 discrimination 歧视 an action， 所以它是一种行为 ，it's a behavior, it's an action based on a prejudice. So a prejudice, maybe you'll not actually discriminate against other people. You just think that perhaps they have certain traits and characteristics that are unfavorable. But discrimination is actually when you take action against them. For example, you deny them the opportunity to interview for a job. And that will be considered discrimination, of course. And of course, discrimination is against the law. Okay, so please write down these three terms. Remember the differences, because usually when we talk about them, we often get confused and we don't know how to use these terms when we speak or when we write. Okay, 所以我需要你就是把这个三个字去做一个区别了。好，那你可以看到这个图表的话 ，so stereotype leads to prejudice, and prejudice leads to discrimination. It isn't always like this. It isn't always a reinforcing cycle, okay? But it can affirm some people's confirmation bias. 说不定他今天这个刻板印象是不好的，所以他 就是认定每一个人，不管是素食者或者某一族群的人，他对他有刻板印象以后，他可能会对他有偏见。那对他有偏见以后呢，可能他会采取一些动作去歧视他。那这样子的话，可能会加强他对这些人的刻板印象，因为他可能对人家不礼貌，人家也不会善意的回应嘛，所以会 reinforce the cycle. Okay, so many people think that stereotypes actually eventually leads to discrimination. So let's go over the definition of racism because this is the word that you encounter all the time. 所以种族歧视，因为种族嘛，它是跟你身体的这个构造有关的。我刚刚说 ethnocentrism， 帮我这个字再写一次好不好？它是跟 culture 有关的，所以你觉得你文化是优越别人的。OK， 好，那 racism 的话就是真正是种族歧视了。那 what is racism? Racism is the belief. Okay, I'm going to read it once, and then you can repeat after me if you would like. Okay, it's not really too helpful. Actually, I will give you 5 seconds to read this really quickly. Okay, now it's my turn to read. Racism is the belief that a particular race is superior or inferior to. 你可以记这个片语，我也帮你写下来了。较优秀或者次于。To another, that a person's social and moral traits are predetermined. 之前就被预定的，被决定了 by his or her inborn beliefs. 生出来就有的。inborn biological characteristics 生出来就有的这些特征，身体的这些特征。Racial separatism is the belief, most of the time based on racism, that different races should remain segregated and apart from one another. 所以 racial separatism 是觉得我们种族是应该要分开的。那你觉得在美国？种族跟种族会不会分开相处 ？So do you think the races actually intermingle in the U.S. or do you think they actually separate into different groups? And I can tell you this because I lived in different cities in different states in the U.S. for over 20 years. I've been in Taiwan for about 14 years. Okay, so you can probably guess how old I am. I lived in the U.S. for 24 years, I believe. Okay, so I'm going to read this again really quickly. And then we're going to go over definition, and then I'm going to tell you my experience and what you can do to reduce racism or discrimination, or at least avoid it. Okay. Racism is the belief that a particular race is superior or inferior to another, that a person's social and moral traits are predetermined by his or her inborn biological characteristics. Racial separatism is the belief most of the time based on racism that different races should remain segregated and apart from one another. 那你会认同这个吗？我当然是不认同啦。OK， 好，但是我们来看一下这些关键字好了 ，superior to or inferior to。较优秀或者次于的 social and moral traits. I'm not going to read the Chinese because I already wrote it for you down here. Predetermined racial separatism, remain segregated. What words would you face or will you encounter on the TOEFL? Superior to, you'll definitely encounter on the TOEFL or IELTS. So please write that down. But usually when they mention this, of course, they're not talking about race. Okay, they're talking about quality of products, quality of perhaps technology. Okay, so superior to or inferior to， 帮我写一下，好不好？为什么？因为它这边的话，它是一个片语的。If you just want to use it as an adjective before and now, it's just superior. It's not superior to. So you can say superior product, superior product, and that's just an adjective. You don't need to add the to. Okay, so this is the definition of where racism is by the Anti-Defamation League, which is a Jewish organization. I believe it started in the early 1900s, I believe 1910-ish around. Okay, you can look that up on Wikipedia by yourself, or you can leave a comment after you check the facts. But I will give you the lecture notes, and this, of course, you can look at the handout after our class. 好，那我们来说起因好了 ，cause 是起因嘛 ，OK，reasons 是原因。Cause 是起因 factors 是因素，这三个字常常会搞混。So many people get confused about reasons, causes, and factors. Please write down these 3 words. Okay, so some possible causes of racism. Can a factor be a cause? Of course, but a reason is usually a bit more complicated. Okay. One possible cause is upbringing, 教养. Let me give you a story, and it's a very personal story, in my opinion. I seldom encounter racism when I was growing up in the U.S. However, this one time it really shook me to the core. 你可以把这个片语写下来. I was walking home. I think I was in high school, and I was walking home with a group of friends. We were just playing basketball. And I was just dribbling the ball down the street, and this kid, I believe he's about 5, maybe 4 years old. He's riding his tricycle. So it seems like this is straight out of a movie. And he actually stops in front of me, and I have no idea why this little kid is stopping in front of me. He was white, okay? Well, he's probably still white, okay? And he said to me, why are your eyes so slanted? Okay, because when I was young, I guess 我是有单眼皮的嘛, okay? So and my eyes were a bit slanted, okay? So it's a genetic trait. What do you want me to do about it? Okay, so he told me, he actually made the face. He's like, why are your eyes so slanted? Okay, why don't you go back to China? He said that to me. And you know, this kid is only 4 or 5 years old, right? So who would actually teach him this, right? So of course they don't teach him this at school. So it has to be his parents, right? So if your parents pass on their racist ideology to you, well, it may influence you. Many people have racist parents, but they're not racist, right? So it's a possible cause. It's not the only cause. And to be honest, when I was growing up as a little kid, all the kids, no matter what their color were or are, they play together. If you walk into any kindergarten or preschool or elementary school, most of the kids are mingling and playing together. They don't really know what racism is until they grow up. Why? Well, it could be, one possible reason is their upbringing. So what do you think about this story? It was actually quite sad because, of course, I wasn't mad. I mean, that kid, he was only like 4 or 5. He didn't know what he was saying. He told me I was a chink. He told me I had slanted eyes. Then he told me to go back to China. And when I said I wasn't from China, he told me to go back to Japan. So of course, me and my friends, we didn't really say much because it was one of those awkward moments, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to yell at someone else's kid? So I told him I'm not from China. I'm from the States, and I actually live a couple of blocks down from him. But as I was walking away, he still told me to go back to China. So, and I'm 38 right now, right? But this happened when I was maybe 13, 14, so I still remember it to this day. I mean, I seldom encounter racism, but it's one of those things that you'll remember forever when it happens because you never expect it to happen. Okay. Let me see some of your comments before we move on to the next part. Sorry, it's a little bit emotional to talk about this issue. Even though I'm 38, I'm still slightly affected when I talk about this very sensitive and private issue. Okay, you guys are still talking about cause, reason, and factor, I suppose, because there is a lag. Okay, so let me see how many people are online. 141 people. So, of course, this is a very sensitive topic, and many people want to hear about it. Okay, so let's go on and talk about, you see, Safari is always crashing. Okay, peer pressure? Not really. Most people in my school, I'm going to tell you the truth. In my school was nearly all white and Latino. I think it was about 60% white, maybe 35% or 39% Latino, and the remaining few percent were African Americans and Asian. And to be honest, I think out of a class of 400 to 500 people, only 2 people were Asian. One was Vietnamese and one was me, Taiwanese, right? So it was very difficult to find anyone who looked like me at school. And of course, I think one of the reasons that I was picked out for bullying was because I looked different. And I acted differently too, because perhaps of cultural difference. And even though I grew up in the US, I speak the language fairly fluently, as you can tell. Not perfectly, because I've been living in Taiwan for the past 14 years or so. But I didn't really have a language problem, and I grew up with the kids, I played with the kids, we were all friends. But occasionally I still encounter some bullying. I think there was once when I was in elementary school, just once. And this is also very upsetting to me too. It's peer pressure, right? This Filipino kid, he was with a white kid, and they ran up to me and they told me that I was a chink. Again with the slanty eyes. They show me my eyes slanted, and the Filipino kid actually spat. He spit it on my face, and he told me to go back to China. He said I was a chink. Of course, I was very angry, and I tried to fight with them, but what could I do, right? I wasn't as big and strong as these kids, and of course, I was beaten down by two, 3 kids. Was it 2, 3 kids, or just that Filipino kid owned me? It could be. Okay, I'm not really trying to make this up. Okay, I'm just telling you what happened. So it was a very upsetting event for me at that time. I didn't really know why they had to pick on me because of my race. Maybe it wasn't because of my race, maybe it was because of my behavior, but they certainly didn't say anything about my behavior. They really focused on my race. And I went home and I asked my mother what this fuck you chink mean, right? And it was a very awkward conversation. So I think that was one of the first time I encountered racism, and I'm still talking about it today, right? I'm 38, but it's something that stays with you. But I have to say, all of my teachers and classmates, they were the kindest people I have ever met. So you cannot just judge, you cannot just stereotype a group based on the actions of a few individuals, right? So I have to say, I seldom encounter racism, but when I do encounter it, it's not pleasant. Okay. You can also say personal experiences, because perhaps they had a bad experience with a minority. Perhaps some of their parents fought or grandparents fought in the Vietnam War or the Korean War. So of course they were against Asian, or even World War II, right? So to them, Asians, or to Westerners, or to people in America, they can't really tell the difference between Asians. And I don't really blame them. I have difficulty telling apart Asians sometimes, especially in the US, because nobody really cares. And if you're saying they're racist, can you tell the difference between a Canadian and American? And if you think Canadians or Americans, they're basically share a border, so you think there's a flow of genetic materials. You want to talk about Europeans, Americans. Can you tell a person who is Polish apart from a person who is, I don't know, English? Possible, right? But it takes some time getting used to the different features before you can tell them apart. So most Americans, they don't really, they can't really separate the races from each other. And I don't really blame them, because most people don't like to talk about race because it's such a sensitive topic. And believe me, it's not easy for me to talk about it. I know whatever I say, people are going to criticize me for talking about race. But I think with more understanding, we can come to a consensus. We can't agree on everything, but part of being in a democracy is that you discuss these things openly. And part of being in a democracy is maybe something isn't mainstream right now, but if we discuss it enough, we can slowly change the perception of society, and something that is not mainstream can become mainstream. So please jot that down for me, write that down if you want. Okay, wow, that was actually something quite wise. I can't believe I said that. Okay, no, I actually wrote it here. No, I didn't write it here. Okay. let's talk about fear. Fear is another cause of racism because you're scared that these people are coming over and taking over your jobs. They're taking over your land. They don't follow the rules that we set. Even many Asians, right? Many Asian Americans living in the U.S., they don't want more immigrants to come because they feel that these immigrants don't follow the rules. And they just do whatever they want. They disrespect local authorities. They disrespect local customs. So, of course, we create this fear for the local people who live there. And, of course, they don't like people coming over to their place and taking over their resources, hiking up the prices. Can you blame certain people for rejecting immigrants? I mean, some immigrants do cause problems. What do I mean? Let's take the housing crisis as an example. Many Asians, they would move from their country to perhaps London or perhaps the U.S., and they would buy up all the property. And the property prices would go up, and then the local people, they can't afford to purchase housing anymore. So, of course, there's this sentiment, there's this negative sentiment towards these immigrants. It's not always justified, but you can definitely understand where they're coming from. Okay, so I'm not condoning this type of behavior, but rather I'm examining this type of behavior. Okay, 你要不要帮我写 condone 跟这个 examine？ 我好像说了超多英文，然后都没有讲中文，会不会有些同学已经受不了了 ？Okay, selfishness. I don't want to share my resources with you. Why should I? The resources is not really doesn't really belong to these local people, right? It belongs to local immigrants. If you want to say America belongs to the European settlers, well, the Native Americans were there before them. And maybe many people will say, well, Native Americans didn't really develop the land. I think American in the infrastructure, in the entire society, it's basically a contribution from all races and not just from a single race. And do you really want to get into details about who contributed more? Did the Polish contribute more than the Irish? The Irish contribute more than the Italians? Did the Italians contribute more than the Protestants? I mean, how are you going to distinguish who contributed more to this society? And even if your racial group contributed more to society, what have you done to contribute to society? I think that's what most people should think about rather than just push away other races because they feel that they're not contributing as much. I think we should think of each other as individuals and not just clump people together because everyone has his or her own contribution to society. Well, some people, they cause a lot of problems, but this is another issue entirely, and it's not something I'm going to discuss in this lecture. Okay, so selfishness, ignorance, they don't understand anything about culture. Usually this has to do with a stereotype. And for example, vegetarians, they don't eat any meat. They think they're better than other people. So this could be ignorance. Vegetarians aren't like that. At least most vegetarians. See, that's a stereotype, right? Okay, stereotype. Low self-esteem. Possibly, maybe I want to claim moral superiority over other people. Maybe I feel bad about myself, so I have to go and make fun of other people to feel better about myself so I can feel above them. That's low self-esteem. And desire to feel superior, this is usually motivated by economic reasons. For example, Russia wanted to take over Poland back in the days, so they invented all these tales that the Polish people were inferior. Same thing with England, they looked down on the Polish people. So racism basically has coexisted with humanity for centuries. However, it has been getting better and better. So you can't just say, just because something has existed with us forever, that we can reduce it or eventually eliminate it, because we are reducing it through education. Okay. Are there any solutions to racism? Okay, well, of course we can deconstruct and discuss. That's what I'm doing right now. And educate. Okay, remember this word. If you want to solve any problem, education is definitely the key because it has an exponential effect. It's very cost effective. because I can tell some information and you can spread this information. So education is definitely the key to solving most of the world's problems. Look beyond the stereotype. Don't group people together. Look at the individual. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share with you my experience. So I lived in the U.S. for about 24 years. Completed my graduate studies, and then I moved to Taiwan to work. Okay. I've been here for about 14 years. Okay. And of course, I encounter a lot of racism and prejudice. Okay. When I was in the U.S., not really a lot, but a few memorable ones, like the ones I shared with you when I was in elementary school and when I was in junior high school. Did they all come from white people? No. Everyone is racist or prejudiced to a certain extent. Okay. Well, I'm not sure everyone, but most people have do stereotype other people. For example, I think one of the events that I encountered in junior high school, I told you I encountered a lot of racism in junior high school, right? Most of the racism I encountered from Latino students, because they were the majority there. They had like big Latino gangs, and when I walk by, they would call me a chink. I don't know why. I mean, I guess just to make themselves feel better. Do I blame Latinos? No, I don't, because I have many Latino friends. They were just those few individuals who were obnoxious, and they have to prove that they were superior to other people. So I'm not blaming a racial group, but rather I'm blaming individuals. Okay. 那所以我当然会对种族歧视有深刻的印象。So I think I have a deeper understanding of it because I encountered it firsthand. And I know many people say, I never encountered racism, I never encountered discrimination, it doesn't exist, you're full of BS. Just because you never encountered it does not mean it's not real. If you never eat sushi before, are you going to tell me that sushi is not real? Okay, it still matters to other people. If you don't think it's important, fine, that's good for you. But other people feel it's important because we experience it. Okay? Maybe you're lucky and you don't experience it. Kudos to you, great. Okay? I wish I didn't have to experience racism. I mean, it feels terrible, right? I felt like I belong in the U.S. Why are these people ostracizing me because of my race? Okay? And then you can, of course, it varies from individual to individual. It affects everyone differently. Yeah, many of my friends, they never encounter racism. I had a cousin in the U.S. He went to the U.S. about the same age I did. But he was such a big and tall guy, like he never encountered any racism. Why? Because he probably just stepped on the people who were making racist remarks to him. So he didn't encounter much racism at all. But I was a skinny kid when I was little. I was really pale. 我真的超苍白的，然后丹凤眼，天啊，简直是完美歧视的对象，真的完全符合那个华人的这个所有的这个标准，眼睛斜斜的，然后脸超苍白的，像吸血鬼一样。And so of course I try to tan myself now. No, just kidding. OK， 好，所以我常常会碰到一些种族歧视的字眼，像 racial slurs, such as chink. I hear chink all the time. It's freaking annoying, actually. Go back to China. I'm not even from mainland China, but they don't care. I tell them I'm from the States. They're like, no, you're not. Okay. 至少And one thing that's really funny, and this just happened recently, I was at the HSR station, which is a Taiwanese bullet train, high-speed rail. And I met this American guy, and I was talking to him, and he's like, your English is perfect. I'm like, yeah, I grew up in the States. I'm an American citizen. I'm from the U.S. He's like, yeah, but your English is perfect. I'm like, yeah, I'm from the U.S. Hello? He's like, yeah, I know, but your English is perfect. Dude, I'm from California. Stop telling me that my English is impeccable or perfect. Well, it's actually not impeccable because I don't use it on a daily basis. But he cannot get it through his head that I'm from the U.S. So it's kind of funny, a little sad, I guess. But you know, what can you do? Okay, so but I seldom encounter acute racism after high school because people start to become mature. Do they internalize their racism and prejudice? Perhaps. I don't know. All right. Okay. But for people who just encounter it once or twice, that's something they'll remember forever because you don't encounter it every day, right? And why are Americans racist against Asian Americans or Chinese Americans? Many people think that perhaps I'm making a racist statement by grouping all Asian ethnicities and cultures together. But I'm just going to speak for the collective group. I'm not going to talk about the difference between Chinese American and Taiwanese American. You can argue about that if you want. Okay, that is not the purpose of my lecture. I'm just discussing whether you'll encounter racism or not when you are in the USA. Encounter racism, 要不要写一下? It's highly controversial. It comes from the anti-Chinese sentiment, such as yellow peril, because they were threatened economically by perhaps Chinese railway workers. So they always, in their early days, they discriminated against Chinese workers, of course, because they felt they were a threat economically. You can read about it here. And the Chinese people were actually the only people excluded by an official law in the U.S. It's a Chinese Exclusion Act passed by Chester Alan Arthur, who was the vice president who took over. He was actually elected president, but he became president when the president passed. Okay, and 1882, it was the first immigration law targeting a specific racial group. Now you may want to tell me that in Pearl Harbor in 1942, there was the internment of Japanese Americans, even though they were loyal to their country, their new country, which was the United States. So the U.S. government apologized many times for these events, and but it's something that will stay with you forever, right? Because you lived there all your life, but you're still not accepted as a part of the country. And that's, sometimes I feel this way when I was in the U.S. Okay, and of course, like, all this hatred and all this anger towards Japanese Americans and for other Chinese Americans, they spread throughout all the Asian Americans because they can't tell the difference between us, right? 62%, all the Japanese who were captured, 62 or interned, 62% were American citizens. And in 1982, because in the 1980s the Japanese auto industry was booming, and they took over many jobs of American auto workers, so there was resentment once again, economic reasons. And these anger just transferred on to Chinese Americans, even though Chinese Americans really had nothing to do with the Japanese auto industry. And to be honest, the Japanese Americans, they didn't have anything to do with it either, but you just cannot control public anger at this time. So many auto workers were laid off, you should know this term, and the hatred for Japanese just spread to hatred for Chinese Americans. And now I'm going to talk about basically how Asian Americans are viewed today. Okay, Asian Americans are usually viewed as intelligent, and they think we're good at math, I guess because our parents make us study very hard. Is that true? Yeah, most Asian parents are quite harsh and place a lot of focus on education. So am I saying all stereotypes are false? I think there's a kernel of truth or a grain of truth, if you want, in every stereotype. So it's possible that some of it's true, but you cannot judge every individual on such basis. Okay, intelligent, hardworking, and apathetic. 他觉得我们不关心政治，就是真的。Most Asian Americans don't vote because they think what will happen will happen. Okay, said what will be will be. And this is not the right mentality to have. If you don't take an active role in your community, then you're not a part of the community, and of course people are going to distance themselves from you. Okay, and the ironic thing is, okay, ironic. Please write down this term. Okay, The difference between sarcasm and irony is usually something that is true and used to contrast something else. But sarcasm is usually this genuine language used to make fun of a certain situation. So you can write down the difference between sarcasm and irony. Okay? 讽刺的是, our education level and our income level, our socioeconomic status are usually higher. And we are law-abiding citizens. There's a very low crime rate among Asian minorities. However, many people still do not accept us. Okay? They portray us in Hollywood as triad members. If you ever see Jackie Chan's Rush Hour, okay, all Asians are either super cops or gangsters. Okay? Many Asian male is always portrayed as a martial artist. Less and less nowadays, but still, many. Is this because of the prevalence of Hong Kong movie films or martial arts films? Perhaps, right? There are many factors that causes each of these things, but it doesn't change the fact that we are still portrayed as kung fu masters. Computer hackers, not so much. And nerds and geeks. However, there are more and more Asians starting in prominent roles. I'll show you some later. Okay, so more and more Asians start to appear in non-stereotypical roles. And do I think Asians are properly represented in the U.S. television industry? I think so. Do you know why? Many people say we don't get enough opportunities. But if you consider the population of Asians in America, Asians only consist maybe 6% of the entire U.S. population. In Chinese American, maybe 1% or 2%. Okay? Why should every movie feature an Asian actor or actresses, right? I don't see Americans all the time in Taiwanese movies and also Chinese movies. Okay? Are we being racist as well? Okay. I don't know. You answer these questions. I'm just bringing these topics up for you to discuss. I don't have all the answers. No one has all the answers. Okay? So I think for the most part, Americans are open-minded and they do accept Asian Americans with an open heart. There's a lot of racism and prejudice in Taiwan too. Just because something exists does not mean we need to tolerate it. I know that. Okay? But you also have to examine our own society, improve our own society too, instead of just criticizing other people. Of course, we can discuss the issue, but we have to examine ourselves too. And I really think Asian Americans could have more interaction with other races. If we really want to assimilate into a foreign culture, another culture, then you really have to be a part of the local culture. If you interact with these people on a daily basis, 每天的帮我写一下, of course they'll begin to accept you. If you just don't care about anyone, why should they accept you? Why should they welcome you with an open arm? You're there to take their so-called take their jobs. You're not really taking their jobs. You're actually creating more jobs. But in their minds, they think you're taking their jobs. So why should they welcome you unless you prove that their stereotypes are wrong? And should they have stereotypes in the first place? No, they shouldn't. But they do. That's just a fact. And we have to change this slowly. Okay? So participate in community activities. Go out there and vote. Be a part of the community. If you don't want people to be racist against you, then facilitate understanding, communication. Communicate with them. Tell them that you're different than what they imagine you to be. Or perhaps you don't want to tell them that you're different. Perhaps you just want to be the way you are, which is fine too. Okay? I think through these discussions, of course we'll still have our differences, but we can learn to live with our differences. I'm not telling you just to let go of your culture and completely assimilate into the society. I think that's pretty much impossible to do. 那我会在美国受到类似的种族歧视. I think this is the question that most students are here for. Let me check your comments and then we can finish up this last part. Okay, this live stream is rather long, but I'm pretty sure it's kind of interesting, right? It's not a topic you hear discussed all the time on Taiwanese television. Usually YouTube clips are 5 minutes and not a 30-minute lesson. Perhaps there's a reason why this kind of topic isn't discussed for 30 minutes. But I still see about 133 people online, so it means that you guys are interested in this topic, right? Okay, so yeah, I still think you will encounter some, maybe not acute discrimination, but maybe some passing remarks, 无心之语啦, passing remarks, write that down, casual remarks. Maybe they'll say, oh, you're a kung fu master, oh, we can thank Bruce Lee for that. Always, I hate that. Like, I don't do martial arts. I go to the gym, but I don't do martial arts. Okay, math genius. Yeah, many people think like this. I mean, people will try to copy my answers on tests in high school or even in university. But unfortunately for them, I usually get a lower score than them. So I guess I feel bad for them. Okay. How do we reduce racism? I told you, right? Understand their culture. I'm not telling you to fawn over all things foreign. 我没有叫你崇洋媚外，你更想要写这个片语。But I'm telling you, you have to understand other cultures. You have to understand why these stereotypes exist. And you have to change these stereotypes if you want. I'm not saying you have to, but if you want people to stop being racist against you or discriminating against you, then change their perception of you. Okay. 好，那今天就到此为止了。So, 那我们来做一个结论好了。Okay, I'm not saying that prejudice does not exist. I'm not saying stereotypes do not exist. I'm not saying go out there in the streets and protest. But I'm telling you that if you want to reduce racism and reduce discrimination, then play an active role in your community and communicate with other people. Make them know you as an individual and not as a collective group. 所以你去国外的话，你应该去交外国的朋友吧，而不是就是只在待在自己很舒服的这个小小的生活圈。至少这是我的看法。那同学还有其他的问题的话，也可以在留言下再写给我，那我再一一的回答。好，今天就到此为止了，拜拜。Hope you enjoyed the lesson. Goodbye.